My son Thomas was everything to me after my wife Margaret passed away from breast cancer when he was only 14. I raised him on my own, working double shifts at the engineering firm in Toronto to make sure he could attend the best schools. Watching him graduate from the University of Waterloo with honors in computer science was one of the proudest moments of my life. When he started his own artificial intelligence company at 28, I knew all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. Thomas married Rachel when he was 32, a wonderful woman who worked as a pediatric nurse at Sick Kids Hospital. They gave me 2 beautiful grandchildren, Emma and Jake. I'd never seen my son happier than when he was with his family. His company, North AI Solutions, was thriving in the Toronto Tech Corridor, developing machine learning software for healthcare diagnostics. By the time Thomas turned 37, the company was valued at $42 million. That's when Marcus Chen entered our lives. Though I didn't realize at the time how much I'd come to regret that day. Marcus was Thomas's old roommate from university, someone my son had lost touch with for nearly a decade. When Marcus reached out saying he was back in Canada after working in Silicon Valley, Thomas was excited to reconnect. Within months, Marcus had convinced Thomas to bring him on as a business partner, investing what he claimed was $2 million of his own savings. I remember the celebration dinner at Thomas's home in Rosedale, where Marcus charmed everyone with stories of his success in California. But I noticed things Thomas didn't. The way Marcus's eyes lingered too long on the financial statements spread across Thomas's home office desk, how he'd steer conversations toward the company's valuation during family dinners. The subtle comments about Thomas working too hard, maybe needing to slow down. Rachel noticed, too. She mentioned to me once quietly that something about Marcus made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't put her finger on what. "Dad, Marcus is brilliant," Thomas would say whenever I expressed even the slightest concern. "He's got connections throughout the valley. He's already opened doors I couldn't have opened on my own." I wanted to believe that. I wanted my son to have a partner he could trust, someone to share the burden of running a rapidly growing company. So, I pushed my doubts aside and told myself I was just being an overprotective father. That decision haunts me every single day. On November 15, 2023, I got the call that shattered my world into pieces. Thomas had been in a car accident on the Don Valley Parkway. His Tesla had veered off the road at high speed, crashed through the barrier, and rolled down an embankment. He died instantly. The police said it appeared to be a case of falling asleep at the wheel after working late at the office. But Thomas never fell asleep while driving. He was religious about pulling over if he felt even slightly drowsy. I knew my son. The funeral was unbearable. Watching Rachel try to hold herself together while Emma clung to her mother's dress and Jake stood there too stunned to even cry broke something inside me. I stood beside that casket, thinking about all the conversations we'd never have, all the moments Thomas would miss watching his children grow up. At 67 years old, I was burying my only child. Marcus played the role of the grieving best friend perfectly. He gave a eulogy about their friendship, about Thomas's vision and brilliance, about the legacy he'd left behind. He comforted Rachel, hugged the kids, shook my hand with what seemed like genuine sorrow in his eyes. "Thomas was like a brother to me," he said. "I'll make sure his dream lives on through the company." 3 weeks later, Marcus showed up at my door in North York with 2 lawyers. "David, we need to talk about the company," he said, not bothering with pleasantries as he stepped into my living room without invitation. He was different now, the mask of grief completely gone. "Thomas and I had an agreement that you're probably not aware of." He handed me a folder. Inside was a document dated 6 months before Thomas's death, supposedly signed by my son, transferring 70% of the company shares to Marcus. The agreement stated that in the event of Thomas's death, Marcus would assume full ownership with a small payout to the estate. "That's impossible," I said, my hands trembling as I held the papers. "Thomas would never sign something like this. He told me just 2 months ago that the company was his children's future. He was planning to set up trusts for Emma and Jake." Marcus smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "Thomas had debts you didn't know about, David. He borrowed heavily from me to keep the company afloat. This agreement was how he repaid me. Everything's legal and binding. Get out of my house. I'm trying to be reasonable here, Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge. The company is mine now. I'm offering Rachel $200,000 as a settlement. That's generous considering Thomas died owing me money. Take it or fight me in court and lose everything to legal fees. After they left, I sat in the same chair where I used to read bedtime stories to Thomas, and I wept, not just from grief, but from rage. Every instinct I had screamed that Marcus was lying, that something was terribly wrong with this entire situation. But I was a 67-year-old retired engineer. What did I know about fighting Silicon Valley lawyers and forged documents? I called Rachel that evening. She was still at her parents' house in Mississauga with the kids trying to shield them from the worst of the chaos. When I told her about Marcus's visit, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. David, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to show you something. Can you come over tomorrow? The next morning, Rachel led me to the garage of her parents' home. In a sealed box marked Rachel's Christmas decorations was a laptop I'd never seen before. Thomas gave this to me 3 months before he died, Rachel explained, her hands shaking as she opened it. He made me promise to keep it hidden, to never mention it to anyone, not even you at first. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should give it to someone I trusted completely. He was terrified. David. He told me Marcus was stealing from the company, that he'd discovered evidence of embezzlement, but he needed time to build a case. The laptop contained everything. Encrypted files documenting how Marcus had siphoned $8 million from North AI Solutions over the course of 18 months. Fake vendor invoices, offshore account transfers, shell companies. Thomas had been working with a forensic accountant named Jennifer Lawson, building a file that would send Marcus to prison. There were also emails. The last one Thomas had drafted but never sent was addressed to his lawyer detailing his intention to remove Marcus from the company entirely and report him to the authorities. It was dated 3 days before the accident. But it was the video file that made my blood run cold. Thomas had recorded himself 2 weeks before his death sitting in this very garage looking exhausted and afraid. Rachel, Dad, if you're watching this, then Marcus figured out what I know. I'm leaving this as insurance because I'm scared. I'm scared of what he might do. The man I thought was my friend has been stealing from me, from our family, from our future. I've documented everything, but I haven't gone to the police yet because I wanted to be absolutely certain. If something happens to me, please make sure he doesn't get away with this. Don't let him take what belongs to Emma and Jake. I love you all so much. I had to pause the video because I couldn't see through my tears. Rachel and I sat in that garage for hours going through every file, every document. Thomas had been meticulous. He'd saved emails where Marcus had tried to pressure him into signing new partnership agreements. Text messages where Marcus had suggested Thomas was working himself too hard. Maybe should take sleeping pills before long drives. Screenshots of Marcus researching how to remotely access Tesla vehicle systems. Rachel, I said slowly, the pieces falling into place like a horrific puzzle. Marcus killed him. Thomas's accident wasn't an accident at all. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. I've known since the day Thomas died. But I was so scared. David Marcus is powerful. He has connections. I thought if I just took the money he offered and disappeared with the kids, maybe we'd be safe. But then I realized Thomas didn't raise his children to run from bullies. And you didn't raise Thomas to give up when things got hard. We went to the police the next day, but the detective assigned to Thomas's case, a weary-looking man named Officer Patterson, barely looked at the evidence. Mr. Morrison, I understand you're grieving, but this is a civil matter. The accident investigation is closed. If you believe there's fraud involving the company, you need to take it to a civil lawyer, not us. What about the vehicle tampering? I pressed. What about the research into hacking Tesla systems? There's no physical evidence of tampering with your son's vehicle. It was totaled in the crash. The data was corrupted. As for internet searches, those aren't evidence of a crime. I'm sorry, but there's nothing here that warrants reopening the investigation. I left that police station feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. But Rachel squeezed my hand as we walked to the car. "We don't give up," she said firmly. "Thomas didn't give up, and neither will we." I hired the best civil litigation lawyer I could find, a sharp woman named Patricia Wu, who specialized in corporate fraud cases. She took one look at Thomas's files, and her eyes lit up. "This is airtight documentation," she said. "Your son did remarkable work, but I'll be honest with you, David. Marcus Chen has already retained Harrison and Black, one of the most aggressive corporate law firms in Toronto. This is going to be expensive, brutal, and there are no guarantees." "I don't care." I told her, "My son spent the last months of his life building this case because he knew what Marcus was. I'm not letting that work be for nothing." The legal battle that followed was everything Patricia had warned me about. And worse, Marcus's lawyers filed motion after motion, drowning us in paperwork and legal fees. They painted Thomas as an unstable, paranoid man who'd been struggling with mental health issues. They produced their own documents, claiming Thomas had borrowed millions from Marcus with the shares as collateral. They even suggested that Thomas's death might have been suicide because of the financial pressure he was under. Every accusation was a knife to my heart. Watching them tear down my son's reputation, twist his careful documentation into the ravings of a disturbed mind made me want to give up 1,000 times. My savings were disappearing into legal fees. Rachel had to sell the Rosedale house because she couldn't afford the mortgage. The kids had to switch schools. And through it all, Marcus walked around Toronto like he'd already won, attending tech conferences and giving interviews about carrying on Thomas's legacy. But then Jennifer Lawson came forward. She was the forensic accountant Thomas had hired, and she'd been terrified after his death, worried Marcus might come after her next. When she heard about our lawsuit, she reached out to Patricia with her own evidence, files Thomas had shared with her that corroborated everything on the laptop. "I've been carrying this guilt for over a year," Jennifer told us when we met at Patricia's office. "Thomas trusted me. And when he died, I was too afraid to speak up. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not when I know what Marcus did." With Jennifer's testimony, the case shifted. We had an independent third party confirming Thomas's investigation. Someone who could testify that Thomas had been clear-headed and determined, not paranoid or unstable. Then came the second breakthrough. Patricia hired a private investigator named Robert Kim, a former Toronto police detective who specialized in financial crimes. Robert started digging into Marcus' past, and what he found was damning. Marcus Chen's success story from Silicon Valley was built on lies. He'd never actually invested $2 million in North AI Solutions. The money had come from a previous victim, a tech entrepreneur named David Heng in San Francisco, who died in a suspiciously similar car accident 3 years earlier. Marcus had claimed his company shares after Huang's death using an eerily similar forged agreement. Robert found 2 more victims, one in Seattle, one in Vancouver. Both were tech founders who brought Marcus on as a partner. Both had died in accidents. Both times Marcus had walked away with their companies. When Patricia presented this evidence in court, the atmosphere in the room changed. The judge, Justice Eleanor Chen, who'd been skeptical of our claims, sat forward in her chair. Marcus' lawyers scrambled to object, to discredit the findings, but it was too late. The pattern was undeniable. "Your Honor," Patricia said, her voice clear and strong. "Marcus Chen is not just a thief. He's a serial predator who has systematically targeted, exploited, and murdered successful entrepreneurs to steal their life's work. Thomas Morrison was his 4th victim. He won't be the last unless we stop him now." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Rachel's quiet crying. I reached over and held her hand, thinking about Thomas sitting in that garage recording his final message, knowing he was in danger, but determined to protect his family anyway. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every day I sat in that courtroom and watched Marcus's facade crumble. The other victims' families testified. Jennifer Lawson walked the judge through $8 million of embezzlement. A Tesla cybersecurity expert explained how someone with the right knowledge could potentially access vehicle systems remotely. A handwriting analyst confirmed the signature on Marcus' agreement was forged. But the moment that broke the case wide open came from an unexpected source. Marcus's ex-girlfriend, a woman named Sarah Chen, came forward during the third week of trial. She'd been dating Marcus when Thomas died, and she told us something that made my blood run cold. 3 nights before the accident, Marcus came home late. Sarah testified, her voice shaking. He was drunk, celebrating something. I asked him what was going on and he said, "I'm about to become very rich and nobody's going to stop me this time." Then he showed me his laptop. He had files open about vehicle hacking, specifically Tesla's. When I asked why, he laughed and said he was solving a problem. I didn't understand what he meant until I saw the news about Thomas Morrison's death. I'd been terrified ever since, but I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Marcus' lawyers tried to discredit her, claiming she was a bitter ex-girlfriend seeking revenge, but her testimony corroborated every piece of evidence we presented. Combined with Thomas's meticulous documentation, the forensic evidence, the pattern of previous victims, and the forged documents, the case against Marcus was overwhelming. Justice Chen took 3 days to render her verdict. Those were the longest 3 days of my life. Rachel, the kids, and I stayed at my house in North York, barely sleeping, jumping every time the phone rang. When we returned to court for the verdict, the room was packed. The families of Marcus' other victims had come. Thomas's former employees from North AI Solutions were there. The media had descended once the full scope of Marcus' crimes became public. Justice Chen looked at Marcus with an expression of pure disgust as she spoke. "Mr. Chen, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of such calculated cruelty and predatory behavior. You systematically targeted vulnerable people, exploited their trust, stole their life's work, and when they discovered your crimes, you murdered them and covered it up as accidents. The evidence presented in this court proves beyond any reasonable doubt that you are responsible for the death of Thomas Morrison and at least 3 other individuals." The criminal charges would come later, but the civil verdict was immediate and absolute. All shares Marcus had claimed in North AI Solutions were returned to Thomas's estate. He was ordered to pay $42 million in damages, plus all legal fees. Every asset he had was seized, including 2 properties in Toronto and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. But more importantly, Justice Chen ordered a full criminal investigation into all 4 deaths. Marcus was arrested in the courtroom, led away in handcuffs while cameras flashed, and the families of his victims wept with relief. Rachel collapsed into my arms as we left the courthouse. Emma and Jake, who'd been staying with Rachel's parents during the worst of the trial, finally asked the question they'd been holding in for months. "Grandpa," Jake said, his voice small. "Does this mean Daddy didn't fall asleep in the car? Does this mean someone heard him?" I knelt down and looked at both my grandchildren, these beautiful children who looked so much like Thomas. "Yes," I said gently. "But your daddy was so smart and so brave. He knew something bad might happen, and he left us everything we needed to make sure the person who hurt him couldn't hurt anyone else. Your daddy saved a lot of people, even after he was gone." Emma hugged me tight. "Daddy was a hero. The biggest hero I've ever known," I said, and meant every word. The criminal trial took another 8 months. This time, the Toronto police took the case seriously. They exhumed Thomas's body for a more thorough autopsy, which found traces of sedatives in his system that hadn't been detected in the original examination. They recovered data from Thomas's Tesla that showed someone had remotely accessed the vehicle's systems on the night of the accident. They built an airtight case for first-degree murder along with charges for the 3 other victims. In September 2024, Marcus Chen was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 40 years. At 67 years old, I knew I might not live to see him behind bars for the full sentence. But knowing he'd spend the rest of his life in his cell brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt since Thomas died. After the criminal verdict, Rachel, the kids, and I had to decide what to do with North AI Solutions. The company was worth more than it had ever been, but running it felt wrong somehow, like we'd be profiting from Thomas's death in a way he wouldn't have wanted. That's when Rachel had the idea that changed everything. Thomas started North AI because he wanted to help people, she said one evening as we sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Thomas used to do his homework as a boy. He believed technology should make healthcare more accessible, more accurate, more human. What if we turned the company into something that honors that vision? We established the Thomas Morrison Foundation for Innovation and Justice. We sold North AI Solutions to a consortium of Canadian healthcare companies for $48 million with the stipulation that they continue Thomas's work in AI-assisted diagnostics and that they establish scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing STEM degrees. The entire $48 million went into the foundation. We created 3 programs. The first provides funding and mentorship for young tech entrepreneurs from diverse backgrounds. The kind of support Thomas would have valued. The second offers free legal assistance to families dealing with corporate fraud or suspicious deaths of loved ones, so no one else has to fight the battle we fought alone. The third partners with police departments across Canada to train detectives in recognizing patterns of corporate crime and murder. Within the first year, the Thomas Morrison Foundation helped 17 families get justice in cases that had been dismissed or ignored. We funded 32 young entrepreneurs, 8 of whom have already launched successful companies. We've trained over 200 law enforcement officers in financial crime investigation. But the moment that made everything feel worthwhile came on a cold November morning, almost exactly 2 years after Thomas died. Rachel, the kids, and I were at the Foundation's Toronto office for the announcement of our newest initiative, a program to help families of vehicular homicide victims investigate potential foul play. A woman approached us after the press conference, tears streaming down her face. Her name was Jennifer Hang, David Hang's widow, one of Marcus' earlier victims from San Francisco. For 3 years, she said, I'd been told my husband's death was an accident. That I was paranoid for thinking otherwise. Your foundation helped me reopen the investigation. They found evidence. Marcus is facing new charges in California for David's murder. My kids are finally going to know the truth about what happened to their father. You gave us justice. You gave us closure. Rachel hugged her while Emma and Jake looked on, starting to understand the full weight of what their father's sacrifice had meant. Not just for us, but for dozens of other families, for hundreds of future entrepreneurs, for a justice system that had failed to see the pattern until it was almost too late. I'm 69 years old now. The years since Thomas's death have aged me in ways that have nothing to do with time. But when I visit the Foundation's office, when I see his photo on the wall surrounded by the faces of all the people we've helped, when I read the letters from families thanking us for believing them when no one else would, I feel my son's presence. Thomas didn't just leave us money. He left us a mission, a purpose, proof that even in death, love and truth are more powerful than greed and deception. Marcus Chen thought he could steal my son's legacy, but he failed to understand what legacy really means. It's not about bank accounts or company valuations. It's about the lives you touch, the changes you make, the hope you give to people who've lost everything. Last week, Jake asked me if I thought his dad would be proud of what we've done with the foundation. The boy is 13 now, already showing signs of his father's brilliant mind and kind heart. Your dad is beyond proud, I told him. Everything we've done, we did because of what he taught us. That's what it means to be a Morrison. We don't give up. We don't let bullies win. And we protect the people who can't protect themselves. Emma, now 11, has started volunteering at the foundation on weekends, helping organize files and greeting families who come seeking help. She wants to be a lawyer someday, she says. Like Miss Wu. Rachel has gone back to school studying forensic accounting so she can help other families navigate the complex financial crimes that nearly destroyed us. As for me, I spend my days at the foundation meeting with families, connecting them with resources, making sure no one has to face the kind of isolation and disbelief we encountered. Every person we help, every case we crack open, every predator we help put behind bars feels like a conversation with Thomas. Like he's still here, still fighting, still protecting people. Last month, I received a letter from Marcus Chen. He's in a maximum security prison in Kingston. And somehow he'd gotten my address. The letter was full of self-pity, claiming he never meant for anyone to die, that things had gotten out of control, that if I had any decency, I'd help him appeal his sentence. I burned the letter without finishing it because Marcus still doesn't understand. He thinks this was about money, about winning or losing a legal battle. But it was never about that. It was about a father refusing to let his son's murder be swept aside. It was about a wife honoring her husband's final wish. It was about two children learning that justice might be slow, but it's always worth fighting for. Thomas Morrison died at 38 years old, murdered by a man he'd trusted, stolen from by someone he'd called a friend. But his story didn't end that November night on the Don Valley Parkway. It continued in every family we've helped, every entrepreneur we've funded, every detective we've trained to see what others miss. They say the best revenge is living well. I say the best justice is making sure your loved one's death means something, that it protects others, that it changes the system that failed them. Marcus Chen thought he'd won when Thomas died. He didn't realize he just guaranteed his own downfall because Thomas Morrison had raised his children to never give up, had married a woman who was braver than she knew, and had a father who would move heaven and earth to honor his memory. To anyone watching this who's been told to let go, to move on, to accept that justice isn't always possible, don't believe them. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Find people who believe you. Fight like hell because the Marcus Chens of the world count on you being too tired, too scared, too overwhelmed to fight back. But they mess with the wrong people. And those wrong people, we don't forget. We don't forgive. And we never ever stop fighting. That's what it means to be a Morrison. That's what it means to love someone enough to carry on when they can't. That's what it means to turn tragedy into triumph, grief into purpose, loss into legacy. My son Thomas is gone. But his voice echoes in every life we save, every family we help, every predator we stop. Marcus Chen took his life, but he couldn't take his legacy. That belongs to Emma and Jake, to Rachel, to me, and to every single person who refuses to let evil win. And in the end, that's the only justice that really matters.